Aloha mai kākou.
Aloha, mahalo, Manu, for that introduction.
Manu and Mehana.
Oh, beautiful.
Welcome to
Midday Manaʻo with Mehana and
Manu.
Yeah, that's our show. And we brought to you every Friday. Me and Manu take you through a myriad of topics and discussions.
We're gonna have good fun, Garyans,
to our community, and we'll have fun too, right?
I gotta see what we're doing. What we're doing?
Let me take the beginning, and then you can jump in after.
I'll be the middle.
Okay.
And you be the end. You be the beginning. I'll be the middle. You be the end.
This is how it's going to roll today. Yeah. And this, of course, podcast is brought to you by the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement and also the Kaiser Permanente and National Community Benefit Fund. And again, we come here every Friday at midday, Kokalai Kalolo at Avakea. While you're eating your lunch, you can come hang out with me and Manu. Right? Today, we have a very important discussion that has just come onto the scene with a flurry, right? It's really caused tension across the United States, and here in Hawaii too. We often think of ourselves here in Hawaii as being kind of separate from a lot of the issues that are happening on the continental U.S. But unfortunately, the issue that we're going to discuss today touches us here at home too. And that is the recent overturning of the Supreme Court of Roe versus Wade. And today we have two incredible guests with us today, two great friends of ours, Dr. Kealoha Fox, and of course, our dear friend Becky Soon. And both of them will share with us today, why is this issue so important? Why is this overturning so important? And also, provide our audience and us too some background and some context into our cultural understanding of abortion and of especially like mana wahine, just our women's.
I'll say too, for all of you out there who are watching our midday podcast, so even I and maybe even you, we're not really exactly sure, and that's why we have our hoa kāko'o, e kāko'o mai ana, ia maua ia kākou, e vehe, e ho'ike i ka mea nui o ke ia mea i mua o kākou.
Mahalo. You know, Becky, wanted to start off by asking you, and Becky, of course, is a lawyer herself, comes from that legal background, and we recently had a discussion, me and Becky and a few of our other friends, how significant this overturning was. But Becky, can you give our audience some kind of background to Roe v. Wade?
Yeah, sure. And, it might be helpful if we, rewind kind of all the way back. In the 1950s, 1960s, most states, including the state of Hawaii, had laws that criminalized abortions. In Hawaii, it was criminal to have an abortion unless it was to save the life of the woman. And in Hawaii, not only was it criminal for a woman to seek an abortion or for someone to provide it, there were criminal implications to possibly saving the life of a woman who might have had complications from an attempted illegal abortion. And so it was a totally different picture and environment than the one that I grew up in here in Hawaii, where the entire time that I've been alive, I've known to be able to have, autonomy over my body in that way. And so, back in the 60s, one of our representatives, Pat Psyche, a Republican, was married to an OBGYN. And she tells this story in her, one of the books that she wrote, where she talks about how he would get calls in the middle of the night from women who had had dangerous and perhaps botched abortions. And they would be calling him to try to help save their life. They were bleeding out, they were having complications, and he would, risk criminal prosecution to try and help save these wahine here in Hawaii. And he didn't want to necessarily pull in his nurses. And so Pat Psyche, our, former representative, would go with him in the middle of the night. And she talks about holding a flashlight for him as he helped to save these women's lives. And so that sort of birthed for her, her involvement. She partnered together with former Senator and Democrat Vincent Yano, who, was a devout Catholic. He was the founder of Legal Aid Society here in Hawaii. And the two of them worked together to legalize abortion. And essentially it first came as decriminalizing abortion, where okay, it's no longer against the law to do this, that women essentially should be able to pursue this in a safe environment with a hospital, with doctors' care. And that was, a few years before Roe v. Wade. And so then 3 years later, in 1973, the United States Supreme Court is essentially faced with this question. And we know how deep this moral divide is, right? We all know within probably our own ohana, certainly within our communities and across the country, the emotions and the beliefs around this run very, very deep on all sides. I don't think there's two sides. I think it plenty sides. And so the US Supreme Court essentially sort of struck a balance. And that's what Roe v. Wade was. In many ways, it was a balance. It said, okay, pre-viability, so before a fetus could potentially survive outside of the womb on its own, states can regulate the procedure, but they can't do anything to substantially be an obstacle or prevent a woman from making a decision to have an abortion. After viability, they could provide, states, could provide more restrictions, but it still had to always have an exception to protect the life of a woman or possible fetal abnormalities. And so that was sort of the balance that they struck. And that's been the law of the land for the last, almost 50 years. Like I said, I've grown up only knowing this, right? As this environment. And I think many people in Hawaii have grown up knowing only this reality of being able to make decisions about our own health, our own safety, our own future. And
mean to interrupt you, but you bring up a great point, and I'm going to touch back on it later on, because I want to ask you about states' rights in the aftermath, right, or just how our state deals with the aftermath of the overturning of Roe v. Wade. But that was a great background. I didn't realize that abortion rights, or the rights of women to safely have an abortion, was a bipartisan effort here in Hawaii. Right, that Republican introduced it, and had Democratic partners. That's important. That's an important lesson to learn for today, especially when it comes to these types of what most would consider a human right.
I have two questions. The first one is really very personal, and I know that this subject is, it's really kapu. But you say that about the fetus and the amount of growth, or basically of ola, when it could survive outside of the kino or kamakuahine. How long is that? And that's a really tough question even to ask, because I just think it's kind of an amazing thing.
So I'm not a doctor, and it's not written in our statute, but generally what we understand in the community is it's somewhere around week 24 to week 28.
Okay, so that's enough.
And actually, some of that is this process that initiated to overturn Roe v. Wade. In layman's terms, in my understanding, is really a gateway. It's a gateway to obliterate a lot of other civil rights that have come through the Supreme Court over the last, I want to say 3 decades, because to me the 70s only happened 3 decades ago, but I know that that's wrong. That's my own sense of mortality. I know I was born in 72, so this comes right after I was born, but it's. And that's the way that I see it. But Becky, Manu's question is, why did this come up again?
What was the need for it?
So, not all communities agree on this issue. And so states in other parts of the country have for many years been trying to restrict women's right to make this decision, with her ohana, with her akua, with her almakua, with her, whoever, her kauka, whoever she wants to involve in that decision. There are communities and there are states that have been trying to make it so that she wasn't able to make those decisions, or that pregnant people were not able to make those decisions for themselves for a long time. And, I grew up, again, in a different reality. I grew up in a reality where we don't put the rights of the minority up to the vote of the majority. We don't put civil rights and basic fundamental stuff up for popular vote. But in some states, they've gained power. This has been a long game that they've been working to put justices in the right courts, to put legislators in the right seats who are really solely focused on making it so that abortions were no longer legal in their communities. And so this in particular was a case that came from Mississippi. And essentially the Mississippi legislature passed a law making it illegal to have an abortion after 10 weeks. And that case went to the Supreme Court. It was denied all along based upon, Roe v. Wade precedent, based upon the belief that the U.S. Constitution protects a right to privacy for individuals to have a right to privacy. And it went to the Supreme Court, and the court makeup has changed. And we know that there's been a successful effort to put justices that feel differently on this issue and others in the Supreme Court. And they have, used this opportunity not just to uphold the Mississippi law, but they went beyond it and said that there is not a right to privacy. I keep saying safety because it feels like safety, and it implicates safety, but that there is not a right to privacy in the Constitution itself. And that is where we're starting to see all these other possible
all the other attacks coming, down the line. Mahalo for that background. I want to leave kind of the American arena for a second here and jump back to Hawaii and Dr. Kealoha Fox. I know a lot of your work has been in not only understanding the moʻolelo of our Kanaka today, all of us here today, but also some great research that you have on moʻolelo practices, ika wakahiko. Yeah. Can you share some of that, Pilina, with the conversation that we're having now, especially with this topic? Yeah. What are some understandings that many of us may not know today about practices related to women's health?
And I think that this is really an important tie-in, that Native Hawaiians live in every U.S. state, in every territory, and throughout the affiliated Pacific. And so this is not just a Hawaii issue for what our statute says and what we have on the books in our great bipartisan history, but part of our story doesn't start in 1950 or the 1960s, right? Our story actually goes back to Kawakahiko, and that's a lot of where my work, my research and my practice has been centered in the deep and the rich history and the philosophy of health and biomedical sciences ancestral to the traditional medicinal practices of Kanaka Oiwi, right? And so when we say that abortion care is healthcare, it is now in Hawaii, and it has been from Kawamamua. And I think that that's really important for people to know, to be educated about, and for them to seek knowledge to be learned in this way. And so my work and research and practice really looks at the ethnomedical history and the way that ties into science, medicine, and health practices and interventions of today, right? So how can the past inform us in the present so that we can create strategies, recommendations, and solutions in our best interest, in our own self-determined interest for the future.
What are some of those momis, Kealoha? What are some of those momis that you have? Because Manu is blinging here with his momis around his neck, and I'm getting very jealous because it's the only thing I don't have.
Cousin.
I have no momis, right? So anybody out there who want to give some momis,
right now,
no, it's my cut. It's gorgeous, but we also refer to momis as
words of pearls of wisdom.
Right.
Really.
What do we have from
because
our
not
ancestors?
only us two, but everyone we're talking to, and the audience for Midday Manaʻo with Manu and Mehana is actually growing. And I don't think you know all of it. So ho'ike mai, ika manaʻo laula no ka lehu.
Of course, and Manu's momis are so beautiful, and I'm wearing my momis actually from Jackson, Mississippi today. In allyship to the advocates and the activists and the providers and the clinicians who have been doing this work. And the reason why we're having this conversation today, where I was able to spend time for racial justice. It's important for us to know that as Native Hawaiians, we have ancient practices, techniques, our own providers, our own medicines, and medical instruments, which all indicate that Native Hawaiians have long used prenatal planning, and that we have practiced methods of birth control to circumvent intended pregnancy, and we have practiced abortion. And this is prior to Western contact, right? We have all of this. This is documented through many different oral histories, through moʻolelo, through archives, through the practices that are passed down in our different hui and our halau and our pa today with our elders and our loea. So it's really important that people know that, for example, we have always had these la'au pa, that these are the medicines used to induce abortion and prevent the pregnancy from taking, for example. And so that's similar to what we would know as emergency contraceptive in contemporary medicine today, right? So for lack of a better term, this is our own version of Plan B, exactly. And so these unwanted pregnancies were controlled in this way with our la'au and our la'au lapa'au practices from Kohuna, and was actually very tightly regulated and controlled within our kapu system. And so women were encouraged to go to their kahuna, just like we're encouraging people to be able to seek out safely their providers and practitioners today. And so we have many of these indications still, right? So many of us grow up as young women in Hawaii, right? You know when and maybe when you shouldn't be drinking ava, for example, right? We kind of just know that, and it comes second nature, but that's deeply rooted in our ancestral practices that are embedded within each and every one of us today. I just wanted to give another example of a momi that, you know, through my research, I've been able to talk about, and that's these medical instruments and devices, which are akin to surgical abortion, if you will, right? And so we have these o'o kolohua, for example, and these are instruments that were used safely with the practice of the kahuna, and it would abort the pregnancy. And so we have examples through moʻolelo, we have examples through our lexicon of hua'olelo, of our Hawaiian terms that continue to sit with us today. And so many of these, I think, should be remembered and revived and revitalized when we have conversations about health and medicine. We are a culture and a people of medicine and health, of all at all times, right? We've always sought that balance.
Right. You know, and I wanted to tell you, Kealoha, I think some of those instruments actually exist till this day. I went to a back tour of Bishop Museum, and a lot of those implements are still there to see. And
it's that kuana ike that you're talking about, Mehana and Manu, that I think our history sets a cultural precedence for us to further explore the ethical, the material, and the moral kuleana that we have to further improve the health of our people in all the ways that looks like, especially for pregnant people and for wahine. And so I think that kuana ike is really important. And we share that kuana ike with other Polynesians, with other Melanesians, right? So we can look at the mo'olelo of Hina, for example, and Maui, and we can look at all of these different mo'olelo that talk about the results of a pregnancy in abortion, in miscarriage, in stillbirth, in surrogacy practices, through full-term delivery. We actually have all of this in a range of information that our people, our indigenous knowledge continues to survive today for us to learn from, make our recommendations and solutions so that others do not make those recommendations and decisions on behalf of us.
Two things right there, though. I think besides, throughout Moana Nui Akea, the Pacific, I think other cultures around the world have similar beliefs or practices. You go so I mentioned earlier Umiali Loa and Akahia Kuleana. Let's go way back to Ho'okukalani and Wakea, and the idea of having a birth that was a stillborn birth, and basically kanuia, iloko kahonua, and mai laila mai ke kalo mua. And again, it's not exactly tied into the discussion, but those topics that are very personal really are kind of foundational in our culture.
Well, we definitely have a panorama of mo'olelo that all of those put together, what Manu is sharing, of course, what Kealoha is sharing too, right, become part of this this ka'umeke ka'eo, right? This wealth of information that we have, and I think to Kealoha's point, right, we have this information, so no one else should have to dictate that morality or that those practices upon us.
Personal.
And we know them, and we have the context,
and they're foundational in our mo'omeheu.
Yeah.
Right. And so when you look at the mo'olelo, right, of you look at even across the Tuamotus and Tahiti and Rarotonga and Aotearoa variations, right, when Maui Tiki Tiki Rataranga is aborted, right, and then is Hina puts the fetus into the ocean, into Moana Nui Akea, she does it with intense intentionality. And I think that is very important for us to draw from that mo'olelo, from these ka'au, and to know that the intentionality of our decision, the agency and the autonomy over wahine and mana wahine in our reproductive freedom is really at stake here when other people decide to dictate the terms and the conditions for us.
Right.
That is that's your moment right there. That's everyone out there. Yep. That is a gift to all of you. What Kealoha just stated there about that moment. And now even me, I'm a fan of Haumea.
Yes, you are.
Right. And I love to tell the mo'olelo and just the
everybody knows that. Everybody knows that.
Right. But what you have shared just now, I want to now dive deeper into Hina, because you are right across the Pacific, right? So not even Hawaii, not even throughout our cousins and so forth, but even as far as the Philippines and as far as going closer into Asia, Hina, Sina, Sia, all of those female deities. I'm realizing now the idea of wahine's not only health but choice and intention, right, rings real clear in the Hina mo'olelo, right, in that knowledge system we call Hina.
And I want to bring in, so now, again, extending a little bit beyond the specific subject matter here and talking about Ieve in general. Kihei Nahale'a and what he did and insisted upon that really changed the laws about the afterbirth, the Ieve of the Makuahine. In Hawaiian thinking, that is not Opala. That has... It continues to ola. In the mele, ea mai Hawaii nui akea, ea mai loko mai okapo. It goes on, it talks about the birth of Hawaii and then Maui and then Molokai and so on. But it describes separately in the Maui Kaho'olave section that Molokini is an Ieve. So this Ieve was basically thrown into the ocean and lives again as an island, and that island is Molokini. So for us to consider, and we get back to the general concepts of Helei mai ole keiki. An unfading lei is a child. But even for things that come from the mother and all those that apuhala and the things that the makuahine might do to lapa'au, her insides and all of that, it's all about personal health, well-being, choice, and many of getting back to the topic at hand, Supreme Court, speaking about people's religious beliefs and what is proper and what is not. And that does not jive necessarily with indigenous thinking kuana'ike.
Yeah, mahalo, Manu, for that. It's one of my favorite oli, by the way.
I love
favorite
it,
mele. Yeah. You can
but
do
it
that
just
for
puts
me
it
anytime.
right out there. Yeah.
Right. It's so clear, and I think what Kealoha is sharing and what you just shared, Manu, and hopefully for our audience out there, right, in our mo'olelo and in our mele, there is such clarity, right? When you get over your own hangups about not being able to understand it, there is such clarity in them when we try to address issues and understand our ways, right? Our ways and beliefs and understandings of the world. Becky, I wanted to kind of circle back to you. We're kind of running short on time right now, but I wanted to circle back to you and say and Kealoha too, jump in on this one too. But what does this mean for Hawaii? Right. Many people have been talking in the news that, okay, Hawaii, we're kind of good because we have this foundation in our legal system here that allows for this to happen. We're safe, right? And I don't want to put that out there, and I don't want to perpetuate that if that's not true. So one, if you can kind of shed some light on that. Are we okay in Hawaii knowing that Roe v. Wade has passed at our nation, in the capital of the United States? And what does that mean, one, for our legal system here? What does that mean for Hawaii people here in the aftermath of Roe v. Wade?
A great thought, question.
So for people in our community, in our ohana, who are looking for access, there are places here in Hawaii that you can continue to get access. Most abortions now are actually through the abortion pill. It is not a surgical procedure for many, many, many people. And there is access through telehealth as well as in Guam from providers here in Hawaii. So it is legal. And I think from a public health standpoint, it's important that we do say continues to be legal, though that basic right is protected. But it is also true that that foundation is absolutely being cracked. And it is absolutely true that the same rights that the decision in Dobbs, the one that the court just made, the basis of that decision cuts at fundamental core things that could impact Hawaii. So for example, we know that, basing this decision based upon the right to privacy, the dissenting opinion in the court talked about this whole fabric, this whole constitutional fabric, the US constitutional fabric that protect the idea of autonomous decision-making. And based upon many of those decisions, then other rights went forth. So for example, part of Roe was actually based upon a decision made earlier in Griswold. So a few years earlier, by the way, a decade earlier, again, contraception wasn't even legal. Back in the 60s, birth control pill wasn't even legal. And so you had women got pregnant, for the most part, they dropped out of school. So you had less than 10% of women who were entering the medical, the legal fields. Less than 10% of the people entering these fields were women because they were getting pregnant and unable to complete studies. Fast forward to just 10 years later, after abortion, after birth control is legalized, after Title IX is legalized, making it illegal to discriminate against women in education, and you have close to 30% of those entering these fields are women. So there's this direct relationship between women's ability to make autonomous decisions over our body, whether it's through contraception, abortion, et cetera, and our ability to fully participate in these spaces in our community. And so those cases are implicated. More recently, we know that there were cases around the rights of same-sex intimacy and marriage. So in the Lawrence case, protecting the rights of same-sex intimacy, and then in more recently, the Obergefell case that upheld the rights of same-sex individuals to marry. It's all based upon the same stuff, the same core tenet beliefs that the US Constitution protects the right to privacy.
And sorry, we got to wrap up. We're like way over time right now, but I thank you guys so much for your presence here. And Becky, from what I heard from you, what this lays the foundation for is attack on, one, the rights of women to have control over their own bodies. That's one. Also, the rights of contraception may be in jeopardy, also from what you were saying. And then also will lead down to a cascading effect to those other rights that we've cherished so much here in Hawaii. If you've seen the activism amongst especially Native Hawaiians around gay rights and marriage and so forth, those things are all kind of on the chopping block. It could possibly be on a chopping block. talk, coming up. So I thank you guys for your Ike today and sharing with us and your patience with us and all of our fun shenanigans that me and Manu get into on here. But again, Dr. Kealoha Fox, thank you so much for that. And we got to do a whole separate podcast with just individually, with just you two, and we could go off on this subject and for our communities for much, much longer.
Yeah, we all need to learn and
mahalo. And also to you, Becky, thank you so much for your time today. I know you're a busy woman. You're a backbone of many of the things that are going on here in Hawaii. So thank you for your time today. And again, Manu, mahalo for that and for your insight and your questions and your ike manaʻo. All the time is ike kuuna of our kupuna. Thank you for sharing
I'm not a kupuna just yet. But again, but for our audience out there, again, and mahalo ya olua, but this is extremely personal. And we value that. It's not hila, but we need to understand this because it will impact our ohana.
Oh yeah. And on that, again, from Midday Manaʻo with Manu and Mehana and Manu, just know get all M's inside, from the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement, and of course from Kaiser Permanente Community Benefit Fund. We thank all of you for joining us, and come back again next week Friday.
Mahalo
Check us out.
anui loa ya olua.
Ahui ho kako.